He was a boy who belonged to no one, a stray called Scrap, with eyes the color of a washed-out sky and a soul as quiet as dust. They said he'd been found clinging to a broken wagon wheel, the sole survivor of a cholera cart. Jedediah Thorne, the ranch foreman whose land the cart had failed on, took him in not from charity, but because a boy cost less than a man and could be worked twice as hard. For 10 years, Scrap's world was the hard-packed dirt of the corral, the splintered wood of the bunkhouse, and the heavy silence of being worthless. His only value was measured in the tasks he completed without complaint. Then came the day the men found the egg. It was lodged in a rock slide, bigger than a horse's head and the color of dried blood, its shell feeling more like leather than stone. Thorne declared it a devil's spawn, a worthless monstrosity from a buzzard the size of a bear. For a week it sat by the fire, a subject of morbid curiosity, until a fracture line appeared. What emerged was not a bird, but a creature of black scale and leathery wings, with eyes like chips of obsidian. It was weak, shivering, and utterly alone. And in its terrified gaze, Scrap saw himself. Thorne laughed, a cruel, barking sound. A monster for the monster, he declared. He took a piece of charcoal and a scrap of hide. "I'll sell you the beast, boy," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. For everything you've got, Scrap possessed only a single, worn penny, a token he'd found in the dirt years ago. It was his only secret, his only proof he existed outside of Thorne's ranch. With a trembling hand, he gave it to the foreman. Thorne drew up a mock bill of sale, writing one useless lizard and signing it with a flourish. The other men roared with laughter. They threw the boy and the creature out of the bunkhouse, casting them into the unforgiving dark. He was a boy no one wanted, sold a creature no one understood. The cruelest joke on the frontier had just become his only possession, his only companion, his only chance at salvation. But when the world that threw them away would inevitably come back to claim its prize, could a bond forged in abandonment defeat a claim forged in greed? The transaction was one of utter contempt, a final, definitive statement of Scrap's worth. The worn penny, his only treasure, was now a receipt for his own exile. Thorne had not sold him a creature, he had sold him his banishment, packaged with a living, breathing symbol of his own monstrous otherness. Scrap gathered the shivering reptile into his thin arms. It was surprisingly light, all bone and membrane, and it trembled against his chest with a desperate, silent terror that mirrored his own. He walked away from the yellow lamplight of the ranch, his back to the only home he'd ever known, and did not look back. There was nothing there to look back for. The prairie was a vast, dark ocean under a spill of indifferent stars. The coyote's call felt like a taunt. Every shadow held a threat. That first night, they huddled together in the lee of a rock outcropping, two shivering souls against the immense cold. The creature made a soft, clicking noise, a sound of pure misery. Scrap had nothing to offer it but the warmth of his own frail body and a few dried crumbs of hardtack he'd managed to squirrel away in his pocket. He laid them on the ground, and the little dragon, for in his heart, he knew it was something more than a lizard, ate them with a delicate, desperate hunger. He decided to call him Phelan, a name he'd once seen in a discarded book, a word that felt like whispers and secrets, like something wild and special. It was the first beautiful thing he had ever owned. Days blurred into a haze of fear and starvation. Scrap, raised on a ranch, knew nothing of true survival. He learned to find grubs under rocks and to drink from muddy cattle seeps. Every morsel he found, he split in two, placing Phelan's share on a flat stone before taking his own. He would watch the little dragon eat, its obsidian eyes fixed on him, and for the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of purpose. He was not just Scrap, the burden. He was the one who found food. He was the one who kept Phelan alive. Their world was reduced to the singular, desperate goal of seeing the next sunrise. Phelan grew, but slowly, his body still frail from the malnourishment of his first days. His wings, thin as parchment, would flutter uselessly as he tried to chase grasshoppers. Scrap's ribs became a washboard under his ragged shirt. His hope, once a tiny flicker, was guttering low, threatening to be extinguished by the relentless wind. He would lie awake at night, Phelan curled on his stomach for warmth, and listen to the vast, lonely emptiness of the land. He felt as though they had fallen off the edge of the world, forgotten by God and man. He was no one's boy, and Phelan was no one's beast. They were just two mistakes, waiting to be erased by the elements. It was in this state of near despair, huddled by a sluggish, brown creek, that they reached their breaking point. Scrap hadn't eaten in 2 days, giving the last of a captured field mouse to Phelan, whose shivering had returned. The boy's vision swam, the world turning grey at the edges. He slumped against the dry earth, the last of his strength gone. He had failed. He looked at the little dragon, who had crawled into his lap and laid its head on his knee, its obsidian eyes watching him with an intelligence that felt ancient and profound. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on Scrap's cheek. He had not saved Phelan, he had only doomed him to a slower, more miserable end. This, he thought, was the punchline to Jedediah Thorne's joke. This lonely, pathetic death was the final payment for the creature he'd bought with his last penny. As his eyes began to close, he felt a strange sense of peace. At least he would not die alone. The story of the boy and his dragon could have ended there, a forgotten tragedy in a land full of them. But their journey was only just beginning. We see stories like this, of profound connection in the face of impossible odds, and they remind us of the strength of the human spirit. If you feel that connection, if you believe that kindness is a power in itself, then take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you think gives someone their true worth. Now, let us return to the boy and his dragon, on the verge of being lost forever, just before everything changed. They were found at dawn. 2 riders appeared on the ridge, not with the hard, angular posture of ranchers, but with a fluid grace that seemed part of the landscape itself. They were Lakota hunters, and the man in the lead, whose face was a beautiful map of sun and wisdom, was named Two Hawks. He dismounted, his movements silent and deliberate, his eyes taking in the scene without judgment. He saw a half-starved boy and a strange creature, not as a threat or a curiosity, but as 2 spirits clinging to the edge of life. He knelt, his presence radiating a calm that felt as powerful as a mountain. He offered Scrap a piece of dried buffalo meat from a pouch at his belt. The boy stared, his mind too clouded by hunger to feel fear. He pointed a trembling finger at Phelan, who had raised his head and was letting out a low, defensive hiss. Scrap's voice was a dry rasp. Him first. Two Hawks' eyes softened with a deep, knowing respect. He broke the jerky in 2 and held a piece out on his flat palm. Phelan, after a moment of tense hesitation, crept forward and took the offering. The journey to their camp was a dream. The other hunter, a younger man, lifted Scrap onto his horse while Two Hawks carefully gathered Phelan into a blanket-lined satchel. The camp was not a collection of rough buildings like the ranch, but a circle of painted teepees that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. It was alive with the smell of wood smoke, the sound of voices speaking in a melodic tongue, and the laughter of children. It was a world of color, community, and warmth that washed over Scrap's starved senses like a healing balm. Here, there were no locked doors, no silent, solitary meals. There was only the open sky and the open faces of the people who now gathered to see the strange arrivals. A woman with kind eyes and hair woven with threads of silver emerged from the largest teepee. Her name was Singing Reed, and she was Two Hawks' wife. She moved with the same quiet authority as her husband, her hands gentle but sure as she examined the boy. She cleaned the grime from his face with a wet cloth, her touch so tender it made his throat ache. She saw the sores on his feet, the hollows in his cheeks, and the deep, haunted loneliness in his eyes, and she clucked her tongue with a sorrow that was not pity, but profound empathy. She led him inside the teepee, where a small fire glowed at the center. The air was rich with the scent of sage and cedar. She gave him a bowl of warm stew, thick with meat and wild roots, and he ate it slowly, his shrunken stomach protesting at first, then accepting the nourishment with a grateful ache. He watched as Singing Reed tended to Phelan, cleaning his scales with a soft hide and murmuring to him in her gentle language. She did not treat him like a freak or a pet, but like a revered guest, a wakantanka, a sacred being. She dabbed a salve on a scrape on his wing, her movements as careful as if she were mending a child's heart. That night, wrapped in a thick buffalo robe, Scrap felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the warmth of safety. It was the warmth of being seen, not as a burden or a piece of property, but as a person. Lying there in the firelit dark, listening to the soft murmur of Lakota voices outside and the gentle, rhythmic breathing of Phelan curled beside him, a knot of cold, hard loneliness that had lived in his chest for 10 years began, for the very first time, to melt away. He had been found. He was no longer alone. The following weeks were a rebirth. Two Hawks became his guide, his mentor, his father in all the ways that mattered. He did not teach with lectures or commands, but with questions that gently dismantled the cruel architecture of Scrap's past. One evening, as they watched Phelan snap at fireflies, his wings now strong enough for short, clumsy flights, Two Hawks sat beside the boy. "The man who threw you away," he said, his voice calm. He thought he owned this small one. Scrap nodded, the memory of the bill of sale still a source of shame. "And you," Two Hawks continued, "do you own him?" Scrap hesitated. He had bought him. But the word felt wrong now. I take care of him," Two Hawks smiled. "Ah. Does the river own the fish that swim in it? Does the sky own the hawk that soars? You do not own him. You walk beside him. His spirit chose to walk with yours. This is a gift." A greater honor than ownership, he began to teach the boy the Lakota way of seeing the world, a world where everything was connected, imbued with spirit and deserving of respect. He taught him the names of the stars, the language of the birds, and the secrets of the plants. He taught him how to track, how to listen to the wind, and how to be quiet not out of fear, but out of reverence. And one day, he gave him a new name. "The name Scrap is a scar left by a cruel hand," Two Hawks said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It is the name of a thing that is thrown away. But I have watched you. Your eyes are sharp, you see what others miss, and your spirit longs for the sky, just like your brother." He gestured to Phelan, who was now gliding from one rock to another. "From this day, you will be Tsatan. It means hawk. It is the name of a hunter, a watcher, a free spirit at Tsatan." The boy tasted the name on his tongue. It felt strong. It felt true. It felt like his own. A year passed, marked by the turning of the seasons. Tsatan grew tall and strong, his skin tanned by the sun, his eyes clear and confident. The timid, silent boy named Scrap was a ghost, a memory of another life. He moved with the easy confidence of one who knows his place in the world, a place defined not by walls or masters, but by relationships and respect. He spoke the Lakota tongue fluently, his English reserved for quiet moments with Phelan, a secret language between them. And Phelan had transformed. He was no longer a small, shivering reptile. He was magnificent. His body was the length of a pony, sleek and powerful. His scales shimmered like polished obsidian in the sun, and his wings, once flimsy membranes, were now vast, leathery sails that could catch the wind and carry him in soaring, silent arcs across the prairie sky. He was a sight of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. His bond with Tsatan was the core of their existence. They were inseparable. Phelan would hunt with him, his shadow gliding over the plains, his keen eye spotting game Tsatan could never see. They communicated not with words, but with a language of glances, gestures, and a deep, intuitive understanding that transcended species. Phelan was not a pet or a beast of burden, he was, as Two Hawks had said, a spirit brother. But such a wonder could not remain a secret forever. Passing traders and trappers brought tales back to the dusty frontier towns, stories of a winged serpent, a shadow in the sky, a Lakota devil that flew alongside a wild boy. The stories were dismissed as drunken fantasies, until one reached the ears of a man whose heart was made of greed and cold memory, Jedediah Thorne. Thorne, whose ranch had been failing, saw not a wonder, but a commodity. A circus attraction. A scientific specimen to be sold to the highest bidder in the East. He remembered the cruel joke, the worthless penny, and the scrap of hide. He still had it. A bill of sale. The arrival was an intrusion of iron and dust into a world of earth and sky. Jedediah Thorne rode into the valley not with 2 riders, but with a posse of 6 grim-faced men, their holsters heavy on their hips. And with them, wearing a silver star on his vest, was a U.S. Marshal named Elias Croft, a man whose face was set in the hard lines of impartial law. They stopped at the edge of the camp, a stark and hostile presence. Thorn's eyes, small and greedy, scanned the scene until they landed on Satan, standing beside the now imposing form of Phelan. A flicker of shock crossed Thorn's face, quickly replaced by a possessive sneer. "Well, I'll be," he drawled, swinging down from his horse. The monster grew up. So did the boy. He strode forward, waving the grimy piece of hide in his hand. "Marshal, I've come to collect my property. I have a bill of sale right here for one lizard, bought and paid for." The boy ran off with it a year ago. Marshal Croft looked from the sneering foreman to the calm, proud boy and the magnificent creature at his side. He was a man of the law, and the law was clear about property. "Son," he said, his voice even but firm, "is this true? Did this man sell you the animal?" Satan met his gaze without flinching. The boy Thorn had cast out would have cowered. But Satan was not that boy. "He did not sell him to me," Satan said, his voice clear and steady. "He threw us away." Thorn spat on the ground. "A sale's a sale. It's mine. I want it back." Two hawks and Singing Reed stood behind Satan, their presence a silent wall of support. The entire camp had gone quiet, watching as two worlds collided, a world of paper and pennies against a world of spirit and kinship. Marshal Croft's gaze was heavy. "The law is the law, son. A bill of sale is a powerful thing in this territory." He looked at the creature, his expression a mixture of awe and official duty. "I have to uphold it." Thorn's smile was triumphant and cruel. "Get some ropes, boys," he ordered his men. "Be careful not to damage the wings. They're worth the most." Satan took a step forward, placing himself between the men and Phelan. He held up a hand, not in aggression, but as a plea for stillness. "You speak of the law," he said, his eyes fixed on the marshal. "Your law is about paper. It is about what a man can own." He then turned his hand over, palm up, an open gesture. "The law I have learned is about what belongs together. Two hawks taught me that you cannot own the sky. You cannot own the river. And you cannot own a spirit." His voice did not tremble. It was filled with a conviction that came from a place deeper than legal argument. "Jedediah Thorn does not want him," Satan said, gesturing to Phelan without looking away from the marshal. "He wants a thing. A bag of gold. He sees scales and wings to be sold." "I see my brother." Thorn let out a short, ugly laugh. "Brother? It's a dumb animal, you little savage." At that moment, Phelan, who had been watching the scene with an unnerving intelligence, made his choice. He unfurled his great wings, casting a vast shadow over the entire group. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound like shifting bedrock. It was not a sound of mindless aggression, but of absolute, protective loyalty. He lowered his head, nudging Satan's shoulder gently before turning his obsidian gaze back to Thorn, his message clearer than any words. This boy was his. Any claim to the contrary was irrelevant. The posse men took a nervous step back. Even the horses whinnied in fear. The air crackled with a power that had nothing to do with guns or laws written in books. Marshal Croft stood frozen for a long second, his eyes wide. He had seen many things on the frontier, gunfights, stampedes, blizzards, but he had never seen anything like this. He saw a greedy, bitter man clutching a piece of hide. And he saw a boy and a creature bound by a love so palpable it was a physical force. He saw the truth. He lowered his hand from his pistol, his decision made. "Thorn," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the finality of a gavel strike, "put that paper away." Thorn stared at him, aghast. "What?" "It's a legal document." "It's mine." "No," the marshal said, his gaze shifting from Phelan back to Satan. "What you have is a receipt for a cruel joke. What this boy has is family." He looked directly at Thorn, his eyes hard as iron. "There is no law on this earth that can take that from him. You're not taking the creature. You're trespassing on Lakota land. Get your men, and get out of this valley." Now Thorn's face contorted with rage and disbelief, but he saw the utter conviction in the marshal's eyes and the silent, deadly promise in Phelan's stare. Defeated, he spat one last curse on the ground, mounted his horse, and led his posse away in a cloud of shame-filled dust. The silence they left behind was vast and peaceful. Marshal Croft tipped his hat to Satan, a gesture of profound respect. "You're a better man than he'll ever be, son," he said, before turning his own horse to leave. Satan stood beside Phelan, watching them go. Two Hawks placed a hand on his shoulder. "Today," the old man said, "you spoke with the voice of a chief. The voice of your true self." Satan looked at the endless blue sky, then at the magnificent creature beside him, whose head rested near his shoulder in perfect trust. He was no longer Scrap, the abandoned boy. He was Satan of the Lakota, brother to a dragon, a boy who had been given nothing and had found everything. He had found his name. He had found his voice. And here, in the heart of the wild prairie, under the watchful eyes of his family, he had finally, truly, found his home.